Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone. It's is today Thursday? MashaAllah. It's a blessed Thursday coming into the night of the second Jummah of Ramadan. And tonight, MashaAllah, for the second night, we have Shaykh Walead Mosaad with us. And tonight we begin with the pre-iftar talk with today's deed. Someone was saying to me that we've chosen this time all these very heavy deeds, which of course are not for one day, but they're for all of our lives. But I think maybe by sort of focusing on one deed a day, we get a taste of what that deed feels like. And I think when we have the sense that of the goodness in it and the goodness that it brings our hearts and the people around us, then maybe we can commit to them even longer term.
Right.
So the call is not only to do things for a day and then to leave them, but maybe to have a shift of focus every day. That in terms of our actions and the way we behave, that we take on this thing as a personal challenge. Because some deeds will be easy for us, and for people like me, most of them will be pretty hard. So maybe by focusing on one each day, it'll help us kind of solidify them in our hearts and in our actions. And so today's deed is a tough one. Today's I would say is like, is probably the top 3 percentile of tough things to do. And we've entitled it "Speak No Evil." And the deed is to not speak ill of anyone else, not only for this day of Ramadan, but to think about doing that as a commitment, which we should for beyond that. So speak no evil. Do not speak ill of anyone during the month of Ramadan or beyond. Without any further ado, Shaykh Waleed.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وصحبه أجمعين. So I was just looking over a little bit what Ghazali said about kalam or speech, and it's interesting the way that he phrases it, and he calls it sharh al-kalam, which means having or them sharh al-kalam, condemning having a overworked appetite for speech, in much the same way that you would say them sharh al-ta'am, right? That you have an overworked appetite for food. So he actually uses the same word, and that it is from amongst the appetites. And we know the Ghazalian thesis divides kind of, and it's not his, I shouldn't say Ghazalian, but it's kind of Aristotle postulated, and all of the scholars of, I would say, akhlaq, or looking at kind of the basic faculties of the human being, divide them into 3, which include the faculty of intellect, and then you have the 2 that are kind of the ones that pull them the other way, which would be anger on one side, and then you have appetite and passions on the other. So he puts them firmly in terms of speech, or having this kind of overworked appetite for speech, firmly in the same category as having an overworked appetite for food, for ta'am. And since we're in the month of Ramadan, I think it's appropriate that we think a little bit about that, And Ghazali also said that speech is unique because it's basically something of an articulation of something already going on inside of you, of your thoughts. And that's actually what makes human being unique, right? The Arabs actually said that insan al-hayawan al-natiq, right? He is, even though the Greeks called him the rational animal, but the Arabs didn't say rational, they said natiq, the articulating animal, the animal that can express its thoughts, right? And that means, number 1, it has to have thoughts, and number 2, it has a means by expressing them, and that is uniquely human. But at the same time, it is those things sometimes that make us uniquely human that can get us into trouble. So this idea of speech, why do we say what we say? What's the impetus? What is the motivation? Why we say things? And we see that I believe the prophetic way in dealing with basic faculties is not so much to remove them, right? Because even with anger, we don't say no one should be angry or shouldn't have anger, but it's about putting anger, as Ghazali would say, تحت سلطان العقل, putting anger under the control and auspices of the intellect, right? And the same thing for speech. So he would tell people, فَلْيَكُنْ خَيْرٌ أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ, say something nice, say something good, or stay silent, right? So it wasn't about don't say anything at all, but if you're going to say something that is good, that is beneficial. من حسن الإسلام المرء تركه ما لا يعني. From the good practice of Islam of a person is to leave that which does not concern them, right? So if you kind of take an overall view, you see that a lot of what gets people into trouble, I think, is being concerned with things that should not concern them. And so you look at the idea of what we say, the validity of it is something good or not, but then look at why do we say what we say. And that means kind of tackling at the root, and that is, what is it that you think about to begin with, right? And that's a whole nother kind of discipline or a whole nother kind of category opening up when we talk about, well, what is it that you think about? And why do you think about the things that you think about? And then we get into, your sensory perception, right? And the effect that they have on the heart. And the images that you think may be innocuous and are not impacting upon you, but indeed they are, because they can stay with you days, weeks, perhaps even years, right? And even in popular culture, they say, like, there's certain things you can't unsee. And it's true, there's certain things you can't unsee. And they could have lasting effect upon you. So it's important even to be kind of very aware and cognizant and have this level of vigilance about, well, what are the things that I'm seeing and hearing and engaging with? Because ultimately it's going to impact what I think about, and then what I think about ultimately is going to impact what comes out of my mouth. So the vigilant Muslim, the Muslim and muttaqi that has some level of taqwa, is going to be thinking about their engagement with everything around them, and not be naive and think that it doesn't have a degree of influence and impact upon them. And I think popular culture today is very naive about this, right? On the one hand, it wants to talk about kind of an implicit liberation of the human being to be able to see and engage in all the things that they want to engage in. But on the other hand, we certainly have a set of principles and laws that cover every country that say, don't do this and don't do that and don't harm others in this way. But yet we do not make the connection sometimes between that which we are engaging with and then its effect on society. And I think probably the most obvious example of that in today's age is pornography. And what I mean by pornography, not just hardcore explicit sexual pornography, but pornography in the sense of anything that is there that appeals to the lowest common denominator to rouse the senses, right? And basically to sell things and for a small group of people to make quite a bit of money, but at what expense, right? And we have today an epidemic of young men and increasingly young women who are falling victims to this whole industry, right? That's in the billions and billions worldwide, where it's estimated up to 75% of internet traffic is dedicated to pornography. And so we're kind of in almost a twilight zone of the effect that this is having on people, on their thoughts, on what they say, how they treat others, the objectification of women, of the human being in general, right? The infantilization of men. I tweeted like a few months ago, I said the objectification of women has led to the infantilization of men. And someone said, well, it could be the other way around. And indeed, it could be the other way around, right? But it's a vicious cycle, right? That we have this society that we're living in, many of us anyway, and it's a global society now, it's a mono society, where these things are deemed to be part and parcel of our God-given right to liberty, right? The right to view what I want to view, and we have made the saqf, or the ceiling of legitimate behavior, something called consent. So as long as people are consenting to do it, then it's perfectly okay, whatever they might be. And there's no morality in that, right? It's like morality and the ideas of higher objectives and rights on a community and societal level have been completely dismissed, and it's been reduced to not just an individual. I wish it was just an individual, but it's been reduced to the ugliest and lowest common aspects of the individual, namely their animalistic side. And we're not paying a lot of attention to the higher side of the individual, the ruh, the soul, right? Because we live in these times of presentism and scientism, and the overarching Darwinian view of life and society. So people are just mere physical entities, right? And they're not beyond that. And so when we reduce people to their physical entities, then we don't acknowledge that there's anything more that a human being can be. And then everything seen everything is viewed in the prism of those physicalities, without anything, without merely a gesture to higher ethical, moral, intellectual principles that define really what humanity is, and not their physicalities. So going back to things that we speak about, speech is something where it's not so much about you, but it's about those who are around you who are listening to it, right? It's your way of being you, but amongst others. When you're alone with your thoughts, right, that's you being you by yourself. But as soon as you engage, right, and obviously when we're talking about speech, we're not just talking about what you actually say, right? Even Ghazali said 1,000 years ago, when he was talking about ghiba, talking about backbiting, that backbiting is not merely what you say. It could be by hand gesture, it could be what you write. Aisha radiallahu anha, she one time wanted to say that a friend of hers was short, so she did something with her hand. And the Prophet ﷺ told her, you've just did ghiba to that person. And when he said, oh, he's like this tall, then that's a type of ghiba. So any form of communication where you're sending a message of any sort, and today definitely that would include all forms of social media and electronic media and print media, obviously, anything that you write, that you put out there. I would say to anything that you read, disseminate, or retweet, right, from Twitter, or something that you repost from Facebook, or a YouTube video that you go and share, because you may not be the author of such thing, but you're certainly instrumental in getting it out, right? And I've said this many times before, maybe we've gotten me in trouble, but people who write on their Twitter page, retweet does not equal endorsement. I think that's nonsense. You don't have that, do you?
I don't.
Okay, so didn't get in trouble. What does that mean? If you're putting it out there, you're retweeting it. Okay, what does it mean you don't endorse it? What, lil-ilm? You're just telling people about it. But if you have X number of Twitter followers, and they see that, and it's something about someone that's disparaging, you just contributed to that disparagement, whether you like it or not, whether you want to put a disclaimer on top that retweet doesn't equal endorsement. But I'm not buying it. I don't think the disclaimer is something that's valid. Yes, Shaykh Faraz.
No, but wouldn't we make a distinction though between, sharing, like for example, some article, some opinion article, for example, right, and saying that I don't necessarily agree with that, right? So you can distance yourself from someone else's educated or qualified opinion, and that's not an endorsement, but or you're not saying you agree with it, but that's distinct from sharing gossip, slander, lies, untruths, and saying, well, I just shared it.
I think you're correct, but I think that fine line may be distinct to someone like yourself, but I think for most people, it'd be hard to find that line between, because I've seen people put out things that are despicable, and retweet doesn't equal endorsement, so I covered myself and that type of thing. But and there were some, if we look at, like, even for example shubuhat in theology or in the deen, some are of the opinion don't even talk about them, because if you bring up misconceptions to people just to dispel them, what if those people didn't have those misconceptions to begin with? Then you've introduced them, right? Even though you're there to dispel them. So perhaps not yourself, but others. I don't trust myself that I might put something out there that maybe I'm even trying to dispel it, but I'm introducing the idea to begin with, and perhaps people were aloof about it, weren't quite aware to begin with. I don't know. But I think we definitely need a completely different new approach to the topic that was chosen, speak no evil, right? And I think the times that we're living in, with a kind of increased level of perception upon many Muslims of kind of opposition to Muslims, right? Call it Islamophobia, call it xenophobia, call it whatever you want to call it. But, and at the same time, I think a heightened commitment on the part of many of our young people to activism and social justice and things. And I think the confluence of these two things has led to what I think is a type of name and shame culture that unfortunately I believe Muslims have adopted some of that too, or have fell prey to this, right? And so we feel that if someone has done something wrong, then it's kind of open license to definitely make that public, number one. And number two, we don't say this, but to humiliate and destroy to the degree that we completely character assassinate them, and they're kind of left with really no life after that. And increasingly with the internet, right? And some people now have called the internet mob, because it behaves like a mob in some sense. So the minute that you kind of put that out there, and then people gang up and group up, and then, it kind of takes the mob, it can't be controlled, and the mob has a mind of its own. So by us participating in that and introducing it, we have to be very, very careful. Even those people that we think might be deserving. And I've used this example before. I think several months back there was a Hungarian camera woman on the beach in Greece, I think, and one of the Syrian refugees was coming off the boat, and she tripped him. Right? She was kind of doing her videography thing, and at the same time she put her leg out, and someone else caught it on camera that she tripped that person. And then the internet, as they say, went crazy, and she was vilified completely, to the degree that she can't get a job. I don't know what her status is now, but at the time she was fired from her job. She can get no job, and it's like her life now is done. It's over, right? Anything that she was doing before, people know her name, people know who she is, and not that we agree, but let's say in a moment she slipped, figuratively, not literally, and she stuck her leg out, and that person tripped. Does that justify all of the stuff that happened to her afterwards? That her life is completely destroyed because of maybe a lapse in judgment at that particular moment? And I find that hard to justify. So, and this has repeated itself, right? A few weeks ago, I think it was the Cincinnati Zoo, and the toddler got away, fell into the gorilla moat, and then they had to shoot the gorilla. But the parents were vilified, right? Like, how can you let that happen, and how can this be? And their name gets out there, and again, on the attack. And I think we as Muslims, we have to lead the way a little bit, and not be participants in this, but rather be the leaders in this, and show people that كل شيء بمقدار, right? Everything in its proper measure. And if we know that a particular medium, like the internet, is increasingly difficult to give a proper measure to, then let's think about satr al-uyub, which is a fadila, right? Let's think about covering people's mistakes, which is a virtue, right? And it's almost like a forgotten virtue. Imam Sa'id ibn Musayyib, he was once asked, there was a drunkard in the street, Muslim, I guess, and he was asked, should we take, or perhaps it was Hassan al-Basri, I can't remember which of the two, but one of those two tabi'een. He was asked, should we take this person to the shurta, to the police, right, so that he could be properly punished? And his reply was, why would you do that? You take him in your house and you dusturhu, you protect him, right? You cover him. He had a lapse in judgment. Who are you to judge, right? And then we function as judge, jury, and executioner with our tongues, right, with our keyboards, and we completely annihilate certain people because we think they're an Islamophobe, or we think that they disparaged Islam, or they did this, or they did that. And that may very well be the case. But should we not be very careful about the approach that we take, right? Even if it's something sort of a mild grievance, is it justified that we completely annihilate and destroy that person, right? And, what is that to say of da'wah to begin with, right? If we're part of the mob, and sometimes we lead the mob, what does that say about us, right? I'm not of the mind that we need to, in order to integrate fully into Western societies, we have to show everybody that we're like everybody else. That's a disaster. We're not like everybody else. We want to show people that there's a way to be different, right? And there's a way to be virtuous and ethical and moral and compassionate and kind and principled all at the same time. And that's the way of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And that's the way that we want to be. We may not always measure up to that, but I think at the very least, right, when we talk about the things that we say and the things that we put out there, we should think very deeply about the ramifications, right? What the ulama say, al-ma'alat, where is this going to lead to, right? And they even made this a criteria for al-amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, right? Talking about good things. So if you want to command to the good and forbid the wrong, one of the conditions or the underlying principles of it is, where will your words or your actions lead to, right? Is it actually going to be effective? Or is it just a vanity project for you to say that, you know, I said this about these people and I stood up to them and I was very vocal and so forth, right? And I, you know, let them know who's boss. But were you effective, right? Did it actually bring about a result where things turned for the better? Or did they turn for the worse, right? And these are the criteria that the ulama have always applied when they think about when to say something and when not to say something, when to take a step forward, when to remain silent. And sometimes silence is a mawqif. Silence is a stand, right? And today people don't think silence is a stand. They think it's weakness. They think it's apathy. But silence sometimes in the face of certain types of adversity, definitely it's a stance, right? I'm taking a stand here. I am standing with this issue, right, in particular, and because I'm being silent about it. I'm not saying anything about it, right? And you look to the beautiful example in the Quran, right? Sittina Maryam, alayha salam, when she was given the virgin birth, and then she's instructed to bring that baby Jesus to her people, right? And what did she say? Inni nadartu lirrahmani sawma. She took a stand of silence. I have vowed to the Rahman, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I'm going to take a stand of silence. And what did Allah do for her in that particular instant? Right? Antaqa Sayyidina Isa. Right? Isa in the cradle spoke. Right? And the first words that came out of his mouth, Inni Abdullah. I am the slave servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So sometimes, I'm drawing kind of an example, a parable from here, that silence will do the speaking for you in some ways. And your actions, in as much as they're defined about what you do, they're also defined about what you choose not to do. And that will also define you. And that will also, I think, be viewed as a stance. And every single thing, every single engagement that we have with anyone or anything should be based upon principle. Not based upon emotion, not based upon revenge, right? And increasingly we're getting revenge and justice mixed up, right? And so we think when we're taking revenge that we're actually seeking justice. And Allah tells us, أَن تَعْفُوا أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى, right? We spoke yesterday a little bit about that justice is very, very difficult to put in a measured capacity, because only Allah really has the power to do that. And for us, it's better to err on the side of caution. You know, what was the mantra of the qudat, of pre-modern Islamic judges? They would say, let 1,000 guilty go free before you convict one innocent person. That was their approach. لا يقضي القاضي وهو غضبان, right? A fiqh principle. The judge should not issue a judgment while they are angry, right? Imam al-Dirdir in Sharh al-Saghir, he said that applies to everything. لا يدرس المدرس وهو غضبان, right? That even the teacher should not teach and they are angry. The husband should not divorce when they are angry. So do not let an overwhelming type of emotion that will cloud your judgment, at the very least have presence of mind and say, wait, I'm angry right now. Let me not make any judgments. Let me not say anything, right? And let me issue what I want to say or what I want to do when I am functioning and able to recognize the underlying principle. Because if I'm not able to do that and I'm overwhelmed with anger or with emotion or with passion, then those are the things that are going to appeal to me, and then I'm going to say things based upon those and not upon principle. But if I let principle guide me, right, I can't go wrong. That's why the Prophet ﷺ or the ulama, they'd say that the mujtahid lahu al-ajr wa in akhta. The mujtahid, what does that mean? The one who exerts effort based upon principle, not based upon hawa, right? Not based upon whim and caprice, but based upon principle. They exert their effort, they make a decision, they say something, and they do it to the best of their ability based upon principle. فَلَهُ أَجْرٌ if he's right, وَأَجْران if he's wrong, and 2 rewards if they're wrong. Why? Because you did it the right way. You were doing it based upon principle, and that is what guided your actions. That is what guided your speech, right? And so we have to have kind of more of a holistic approach, right? And it's not just about sins of the tongue, it's about sins of the mind and the intellect and the thoughts. And then that also is predicated on the images and the things that you take in and the things that you read and the people that you engage with, right? Man jalis ajanis. All of these come together to inform the whole Muslim, and I would say the whole human being, right? And so you have to give it everything, right? And leave nothing behind, and leave nothing for chance, so to speak, and engage, right, principally on every single aspect of your existence. That is the real challenge before us as Muslims, and not to compartmentalize and put things in boxes and say, well, but this is our school activism that's, it works differently. No, it doesn't work differently. It's the same thing. Same principles are at play here. Well, this is business, and no, so what? The Muslims always had the highest ethical business practices. They would never talk up their merchandise more than they thought would have an undue influence upon the buyer, because that's fihi iqab. If they were to get even 1 cent, right, illicitly, based upon the way that they misrepresented something that they're selling, they knew there was no barakah in that. They didn't want to earn it that way, right? So every single aspect of the Muslim has to be defined this way, by principle, by the Sharia, by the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam.
Well, I have some questions, but let's open up the floor. I think Shaykh Walead has said a lot of really challenging things, so there's a lot racing through my mind. I see the sister over there. Why don't you go ahead? So the question was around, Sheikh Waleed was talking about the things that one takes a stand on and being principled. Are there things in your own experience that, at this juncture, that should be taken a stand on? Something practical that you've seen in your work and experience, and other things that it may be better to leave aside.
Well, I think we have to define what it means to take a stand too, because taking a stand, I don't think always has to be in the manner that people picture it, in a very public sort of let's sign a petition, share it on Facebook 100,000 times type of stand. There are other ways to take a stand, right? And as I said, sometimes silence, it's a way of taking a stand. And I think I'm not in a position to kind of say what are the issues that and how we should go about tackling them, and what are the best ways to effectively deal with them and so forth. I can't say that I'm in a position to say that. But I would say that at a minimum, as I reiterated before, that principles should be what are guiding us, and not necessarily, for example, masalih, right? Masalih means interest, right? It may be in the interest of the Muslim community at large, but the moment that we start putting the interest of the Muslim community before the principles of the Muslim community, then we cease to be who we are. You might say, well, this is good for the Muslims that we stand by this particular group because they've always stood by us. And, yeah, but are we compromising any principles when we do that? We may not be. I'm not saying that we are. But if it requires us to compromise something of who we are, of our principles, so that we can have maybe some type of short-term gain in the public eye, then we cease to be who we are, right? Then we cease to be Muslim in its fullest sense. And I worry that because of the enormous amount of pressure many Muslims are feeling today, that they are feeling increasingly inclined to take the easy bait, right? And I believe people are baiting us, and they're putting those things out there to see, how easily can we trip up, and how easily can, just at the sign of a red herring, more or less, that we're going to compromise ourselves and find ourselves in a position where the very fabric of Islam, we've lost sight of it, of what it is.
Any questions from the brother's side? Go ahead, Sayyidi Hamid.
Sheikh, what if you share something online that's maybe negative about somebody, but it affects you personally or as a community, let's say? Let's say, for example, I'm posting something Trump said about Muslims, for example. Should that also be something that should be avoided?
So the question was, just for the brothers and sisters and our friends watching it at home, was that what if we engage in sort of sharing and promoting articles or pieces that may be critical of individuals, Trump-like, whose positions and stands are damaging, I guess not only to Muslims but are damaging. What is the realm of responsibility we have in cases like that?
Well, like I said before, I think we have to think about, why am I reposting that? What am I expecting to happen? What is my niyyah? What is my intention? What is the outcome that I'm looking for? To raise awareness, I think we're pretty aware of something like Donald Trump and what he stands for and so forth. And I think sometimes we run into the danger of having an artificial heightened sense of the doom that people think is out there, but in reality, it may not actually be that way. And social media is a strange type of animal, because it gives you the impression, and the people who devise the algorithms at Facebook and about what shows up in your news feed, I think it contributes a lot to what people call groupthink, or the psychologists call groupthink, which is, it puts you in a bubble and you think like, oh, the whole world is according to the way I think and this small group of people, because look, everybody in my feed is saying the same thing. And you don't get a chance to engage with people who have different opinions. And this phenomenon, I've read in more than one article, has been documented now. And it has led to a lot of the strife and partisanship and things that are not just on a political realm, but even in other realms, social realms and so forth, that is leading to, I think, a lot of the tension and strife that we're finding between people who may have come from different backgrounds and different understandings, but traditionally have gotten along. And now we're seeing that kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, the social contract that was between people that would kind of peacefully coexist, it's fraying at the edges. And just today there was an MP in the UK, in Yorkshire, I think, and she was killed in the street by a fanatic, terrorist. Of course, they won't call him that, but someone who, a political partisan over the whole Brexit, or the Great Britain coming out of the European Union or not, a political issue at best. But here we are, people being so tense and heightened to the degree that they're willing to kill over it. It's unprecedented. So I think we should be careful not to add to a type, I think, of hysteria that may be developing among some. And sometimes the best stance, right, is not to further ignite, but to help to extinguish a little bit, or to bring people down to a level, or down, so that they're working on their principle and not mere emotion. And I think a lot of these posts, they accomplish ignition, right, the lighting the fire. And I think people have the intention to do that. Let's light it up a little bit, see what happens. Mix it up, right? This concept of creative chaos, it's not our concept, right? That's, Western hegemonic concept of let's stir things up and see if we can get any type of result. And that's basically the principle by which all of these fanatics and terrorists operate. That somehow by destruction, by creating chaos, by driving instability, that in its ashes you'll be able to pick up the pieces and forge a better society. That is not in the Islamic tradition whatsoever. There was no Islamic ethos like that at all. It was always about maintain stability so that people can operate on principle, so people can worship their Lord, so that people do have access to all the basic needs that they have. But to intentionally put them through a period of complete chaos and instability in the hopes, right, and I would say false hopes, because it rarely works, that in the aftermath you're going to find something better, right? That's, that's a product of 19th and late 19th, early 20th century, wars that were not started by Muslims in any sense of the word, but were started by those who espouse those type of beliefs. But some of us have adopted that, and maybe not to the extreme of committing terrorist acts, but maybe in a microcosm of that, of stirring up enough instability that we think some type of positive change will come about. And it's actually much harder than that. Change happens gradually. It's not really snapping your fingers and destroy everything and pick up the pieces and see where we go from there. And we have countries in the Muslim world now that are complete chaos, that will not be full-fledged countries again, even to the level at what they were before, probably not for several generations. And so, Allah musta'an.
Shaykh, when you were speaking about particularly, the example that you used of, say, the Hungarian camera woman and tripping up the refugees, and that was seen, and then you kind of approached that particular issue through the lens of, I think, a lot of compassion, and I think that might surprise some people, because when incidents or cases or things like that happen, we see the ugliness of what's possible by human beings. We don't end up being those who offer compassion, but you offered a very strong sense of understanding and compassion and principle, and I just wanted you to explore that just a little bit, because there seems to be a connection between the call to speak no evil and to behave compassionately in the world, and I see a link between you're making a link between the two, and maybe if you could clarify or expand.
I mean, I think that most of the time when people say things that are damaging to others, it has a lot more to do with them, what's going on inside them, than with the other people. So one way that you can think about this, if you're on the receiving end of, the venom, then, what I try to do, I'm not always successful, what I try to think about is, well, it's really more about that person than about me. They're having a bad day, they don't really know me that well. Obviously, if it's someone who doesn't know me, a driver on the street or someone in the supermarket who comes and says something to me, then they don't know me, right? So they can't obviously have a problem with me, it's a problem with them, right? It's an issue inside of them. And if it's an issue inside of them, and it takes them to the degree that the only way they know how to cope with their issues is to hurt others, then I feel sorry for them, right? And I pity them. I may get angry at them, but in the final summation, I can't help but feel, some compassion for them, that they're in such a state that this is how they cope with their very difficult lives, probably, that they're dealing with. And so I think, every person that you come into contact with, he's a book, or she's a book, they're a story. And you might just be looking at the cover, right? And the cover might say something on it, but you haven't opened the book. You don't know the whole narrative behind the day or the week or the month or the years that led to that person being the way they are right now. And perhaps if you were privy to that, right? If there was a way in an instant where that whole person's life could flash before you, and you see all of the background, right? How different would our reaction be, right? And I think it would be markedly different, right? Why is it that we are more tolerant of these type of things with people that we know and we may even call friends than with people we don't know? Why are we more tolerant with this with people who we think to be kind of ideologically kind of on the same side as us? And were it to come from someone who is not, we would be much more quick to criticize. And we know that. We realize that in each and every one of us, because we have access to the background, life story. If we're being charitable, that's the reason, and not some type of group solidarity thing. But let's say that I have access to the backstory of this person, so I am more inclined to be compassionate with that, because, you know what? I know they lost their father last year and they were going through a difficult time, and now they're acting out, so I'm not gonna. But we don't know that. So there's no story like that for the person that you just, that Hungarian woman. Who knows what her day was like before she actually decided to trip that person up? Do we know the whole story? Is there a backstory? Is there something that we should be aware of, right? But at the minimum, we know there is one. We may not know the details, but we know there is one. So everybody's a story, everybody's a narrative. And isn't it more beneficial for those people to open up a little bit about their story, their narrative? And the way that you can do that is by showing them compassion when they're not compassionate with you. And this is actually a mark of nubuwwah. Sayyidina Salman al-Farisi, he was told by the monk in Jerusalem, there's going to be 3 signs. You're going to look for the prophet of Nabi Akhir al-Zaman, the prophet of the last days. And one of those signs will be that in as much as that he is disparaged and harmed, he will only increase in gentleness and compassion towards those people. He said that's a sign. Look for that. هذه من علامات النبوة, sign of prophethood. So should it not be the sign of following prophethood? Right? If it's a sign of prophet, shouldn't it be not a sign also of how we follow prophets and prophethood and their message? And so I see this as a great opportunity, right? All of this discussion about Muslims and they're under the gun and, what are they all about and where they're coming from, what they're going to do. It's an opportunity because people are looking at us. So we can choose to be and follow the blueprint of those before us and work as a very kind of special type of special interest group and, work diligently to see that our needs are addressed. And that is a way. Or we can be a little bit more magnanimous than this, right? A little more big-souled than this and kind of take everything in and say, here's an opportunity for us to show them who we actually are. And we're not a special interest group. We're here for humanity. We're here to serve Allah, God first, and via our service to Allah, we will serve humanity. And that's why we're here. That's what we're about. Not so that I can secure halal lunch at my school, or that we have a stamp that says Eid on it, or that we have days off for Eid. These are good things. It's good to work for those things, but is that why we're here? Is that why Allah put us in these countries, in these societies, so that we can just raise to prominence within our own circles, or are we here to serve humanity? And I think that's the question of the day.
Jazakallah khairan, Shaykh Waleed, for that was really thought-provoking and heart-provoking.
Barakallahu feek.
Jazakumullahu khairan. We're just coming up to iftar time. I'm going to ask